Thanks so much for joining us here this Thursday morning. I'm Marlon Bowling with you, your tour guide to the ag commodities. Well, I'm glad you're on board with us as we take a look at a whole lot of information. Remember that late day sell-off we had yesterday in the grain markets and mainly in the soybean market. It gave back pretty much all the gains it had during the day and then some by the close. But then it bounced back overnight. And now this morning, we have export sales information that came out from USDA just moments ago. We had weekly export sales numbers, and here is a look at what we have. So we have corn coming in this past week with sales of 383,100 tons. We had the soybeans coming in with a total of 410,500 tons. And I was a little bit shocked to see this total here on the soybean meal. 402,100 tons of soy meal sold this past week. And I had to do a double check on that one. It did say 90,900 tons for the old crop. And then it said 311,200 tons for the new crop. The biggest buyer for the new crop, believe it or not, was Poland at 135,000 tons. And the Philippines bought 90,000. Wow. All kinds of interest in the meal market. Soy oil, only 600 tons last week. And then you had the wheat at 359,200 tons. Now we have numbers for sorghum and cotton and rice as well. Here's a look at those. Grain sorghum, 66,600 tons last week. Upland cotton, 102,400 running bales. And the rice, 26,800 tons. Now, to put a cherry on the top of all this, right before I came down to the studio here, USDA said, oh, we also had an overnight sale. Now, you don't see that very often when you have the weekly numbers come out, followed by an overnight sale announcement too. And this was, believe it or not, drum roll please, it was soybean meal. Remember, we were just talking about the big number on the meal on the weekly numbers. Well, now we had an overnight sale of 103,400 tons of soybean meal, and it was sold to Mexico. Wow, that's quite a run on soybean meal. Let's take a quick look at our overnight trade here then and discuss. Now on the corn market, on our quotes provided by bar chart, we had a healthy move higher with September corn gaining 6 cents last night. December was up 5 3/4 cents. On the soybeans, they came back. And we had September 13 higher overnight at 15.22. November was up 13 1/4 cents. Now in the wheat trade, we had Chicago going higher. September up 7 3/4 cents this morning. Kansas City wheat, you had September up 9 1/4. And Minneapolis wheat, you had that September contract there, closing 7 higher this morning. Let's go to Brian Hoops of Midwest Market Solutions. And Brian, what a number on soy meal exports. My goodness, I've heard they've kind of been leading the charge here lately, but what's with that anyway?
Yeah, good morning, Marlon. A really good number for soybean meal exports here this morning, as you mentioned. And then on top of that, a private sale of meal to Mexico. China's showing up as a decent buyer of soybeans, particularly new crop soybeans. Our sales for soybeans on the new crop variety, we're about double last year's pace, which was, a pretty decent pace to start off with. And China has more than double on the books of what they did a year ago. So they are really not buying a lot of the old crop category. In fact, this was like the 7th out of the last 8 weeks where we saw a net reduction of old crop soybean sales. And likely that's going to result in the USDA adding a few bushels back into the old crop carry in category for our balance sheets. But as far as new crop sales go, there's nothing wrong with our export pace for soybeans so far. And as you mentioned, meal has been kind of the bull market here. We hit contract highs in the futures yesterday before a little bit of a sell-off. We've seen a lot of bull spreading in corn and soybeans and meal with these old crop contracts, talking about August, which goes off tomorrow, September, which is going into deliveries at the end of this month. Really leading the charge higher in those three commodities as we see a lot of strength coming in the old crop variety as just that product is in hot demand right now.
Well, it is. September meal up $7.70 in the overnight trade. We'll come back in a moment and we'll take a look at the beef and the pork exports too and what that might mean when we come back. We are talking with Brian Hoops of Midwest Market Solutions, and we're talking about the export sales numbers that just came out a little bit ago from USDA. We covered the grain side, Brian. Now let's cover the meat side of it. We have beef and pork export sales. And let's see what those numbers were. We had beef at 14,600 tons for 2022, and then you add on another 200 tons for 2023. So you have a grand total of 14,800 tons. And on the pork side, you have 21,500 tons. That was actually down 31% from last week. Now, the beef number was up 22% from last week. I'm always curious if China bought any of either or both of those, and it looks like this week China bought 1,800 tons on the beef side, so they were in there for a little bit. Mexico bought 1,500 tons of beef. And on the pork side, Mexico bought 10,200 tons, while China did step up to buy 3,500 tons. So it wasn't that they stepped away from the market. They were in there as a buyer, just not maybe a real major buyer of pork last week, but they're still there. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, they have been a decent buyer in the last several weeks, and I suspect they'll continue to be a strong buyer based off of their economy, their diet, and the fact that the U.S. dollar is weakening. That should help all of our grain and pork beef exports to other countries. So we would expect sales to be strong, and that's going to be a very key going forward for price discovery of both beef, pork, and all of our grain markets. So, the beef sales, I think, were probably a little disappointing and could hurt the cattle market a little bit, but the cash cattle trade came in yesterday steady to a couple dollars higher on a dress basis, at least $1 higher on a live basis in the north, still waiting for southern cattle to trade. But it's the pork market, I think, that is really kind of painting the interesting fundamental picture with August going off the board tomorrow. It's really aligned to the index, which is up around 122. But if you look at the October futures that take over, that market's heavily discounted. And with sales remaining very strong, there may be some spread plays in place here where traders wanting to buy that October hog contract, selling October live cattle as the seasonal start to work lower in the cattle market.
Of course, we had the PPI numbers, the producer price index, that came out this morning. And just like the CPI numbers yesterday, they were lighter than expected. The PPI numbers also came out a little under expectations today. I wanted to take a look at the Dow, and then we'll also look at the livestock closes yesterday. On the Dow right now, we are 244 points higher. The equity market's now 33,504 on the Dow futures. On the U.S. dollar index, remember we had the big washout yesterday, down 430 points right now in September futures. So that's going to be noteworthy here. And on the crude oil market, we're up $1.34 on September at 93.27 this morning. Remember, we finished yesterday on the live cattle trade with October $1.30 higher. It finished at 144.47. Feeders, we had the September closing at 185. That was up $2.50 yesterday. And then on the lean hogs, we had the October up $1.25 at $100.85. So that's where we'll start today. Thanks for the info, Brian. Good to hear from you. Brian Hoops, Midwest Market Solutions. Janet, back to you.